My name is Tori Potenza, and I am the Program Manager for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the School District of Philadelphia. Today, we are celebrating Trans Day of Visibility. In order to do so, we will be hearing from trans people in our community who wanted to share their stories and answer some questions. So for the first part of our panel today, we are joined by Lumen, Stephanie, and Maddie. Thank you all for being here. And then afterwards, you will also be hearing from Joseph, who could not be here with us today, but also wanted to share his story. So to get things started, I'm just going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and anything about your journey you would like to share. So whoever would like to go first.
I can start. My name is Maddie Lubert, or Mix Lubert if you're my student, and my pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I'm a fifth-year teacher in the School District of Philadelphia, and I work at Kensington Health Sciences Academy, aka the best high school in Philadelphia. So, you know, I have had a really wonderful kind of experience as a trans teacher. Because I've had a really supportive kind of community behind me as well. And a lot of that really comes from my school and the leaders in my school, but also just, you know, just people being willing to learn and grow. So I've had a great journey, and I'm excited to kind of share a little bit of my perspective on, you know, how we can make schools even better, even safer for trans people and queer kids.
I can go next. My name is Stephanie. My pronouns are they and them, and I identify as a genderqueer person, which is someone who doesn't necessarily fit into the neat, tidy box of being a man or a woman. I am not a student at the Philadelphia School District or a teacher there, but I am an educator that has worked at a variety of universities and teach ESL classes to adults. So the topic of education and my own coming out as a queer person and trans person definitely resonates with me. So thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Lumen. I use he, they, z pronouns. I work in the Office of Early Childhood Education at the school district. I'm a trans poet and writer. And I've been doing a lot of work with GSAs to promote advocacy and make sure that all of our trans youth are okay. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. So then we will just get started with our first question. So this is actually a two-part question that we have here, but we often hear a lot about the challenges of being trans and the impact of gender dysphoria on trans people. What brings you trans joy or gender euphoria? As well as that question we have, is there anything you want people outside the community to know about trans joy or gender euphoria?
It's always like the standoff. I think for me, something that I'm continually learning is that there aren't any rules that I need to follow. Like there's just no rules I need to follow. Because I think a lot of my life kind of growing up and like dealing with being assigned female, but like always kind of being tomboyish, masculine, and never like fitting in with that designation. So then feeling I had to like either downplay or upplay my femininity, right, depending on the situation. And then I think, you know, as I came out and first got to know myself as a queer person, I wanted to avoid those feminine things because I wanted to identify more strongly as queer, but I've realized that neither of those things is necessary. Like I can just kind of do what feels right and what feels nice to me. Like a few months ago, I painted my nails for the first time in like 10 years, and it felt awesome. And, you know, I got to wear my nails nice for a wedding and stuff like that with my tailored suit. So, you know, I think just for me, it's been that realization that like there are no rules that are required for us to follow, for any person to follow, but especially someone who's queer and kind of doing their own thing. And that's been really liberating in a lot of different ways.
I really resonate with that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, that there are no rules to the gender binary. We shouldn't even have it to begin with. But what brings me the most gender euphoria is watching trans youth figure out who they are. And that's what validates me, is that I'm able to watch other people become their authentic selves, and that makes me most happy. Um, but something a little bit more close is I had top surgery last year, and that made a huge difference in my life, like a genuine weight off my shoulders. So that's what brings me the most joy.
I'm gonna make it 3 in a row because this is really, really important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of people in this community. As someone who found language around being trans later in life, I often thought about being trans or being queer in this like space of like oppression, even my own oppression. Like I came out in my late 30s, so I came out as bi in the middle of the Defense of Marriage Act, right? So like it was not like a cool thing. It was like about like, oh, this is going to impact my life in potentially really negative ways. But like if that was the only thing about being queer or trans, nobody would do it, right? Because there is joy in being who you are. There's joy of bringing your whole self to the table. So when I chopped my hair off for the first time, I went to a queer butch barber in the city, and they had a thing that was called the big chop for people like me, and we like taped the cutting of the ponytail off, and like if you thought I was crying, I was smiling my heart out. Like it was a fantastic day at, performing as a drag king. That was what allowed me to fully allow myself to feel that joy. And then I was like, oh wait, this is not just a performance. Okay, this was an excuse to allow myself this joy. And even today, I was talking to someone in an online space, and they identified as a trans woman and had never heard of the idea of gender euphoria. So there was a bunch of other trans people in the group saying, yeah, like when you see yourself in the mirror, or, it's not always attached to this idea that you hate your body. It can be that this is how you see your body and love your body. And I really, really love that.
I just love that I can feel all the joy radiating from my computer screen right now. It's such a good feeling. I love it so much. So our next question that I had was, what would you say to allies who are looking to actively support the trans community?
I'll step in again. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go?
No, you can go, Stephanie.
My biggest advice to allies is just to listen to queer stories and to not make it about you, right? It's like even donating to a queer space or venue that you as a straight person may not feel super 100% comfortable in, because I know that a lot of queer and trans people don't really feel comfortable in straight spaces, right? So really trying to look at yourself when you're supporting them and asking yourself, is it about you, or is it about supporting this other person that has different needs than you? And I think that's for any marginalized community. As someone who's not a person of color, I have to check myself with those issues too. So it's not just for queer and trans people.
I absolutely agree. I think that holding a space for trans people to be able to speak honestly and sometimes brutally about what their experience is and can be one of the most helpful things you can do for a trans person, is just giving them the space, like they said, to just express what they're feeling and not to hold judgment on that. I'd say also donate to the Trevor Project Fund, donate to Black trans women and their surgery funds on GoFundMe. And if you are to experience a gender neutral person or trans person in your environment, to not make it about them being trans and just them as a person. I think that that is really helpful.
Thank you all so much. That's so great. So the next question we have is, recently the state of Florida passed the Don't Say Gay bill in elementary schools, which limits teachers' abilities to teach LGBTQIA+ themes and inclusive lessons with their students. Similar anti-trans legislation is being brought in other states. What impacts does this type of legislation have on the trans community?
I definitely also want to mention as well, in addition to the Florida bill, the kind of the Texas bill about parents being treated as negligent or abusive if they support their trans children. And they can even, like, there's another, I think it was another state was proposing that they couldn't even leave the state because if they did that, it was like, you know, they couldn't move to get better care for their kids because even that would be a violation. So I think like the Don't Say Gay bill is a big thing, and it's very visible and very easy for us to talk about. But I think it's also really important for us to think about the other even more intense policing that trans people are experiencing, and trans kids in particular. And we see it all the time right now too with sports. Like there's a whole long and complicated conversation about a swimmer at Penn who happens to be a trans woman and also is a great swimmer. Because also like athletes almost always have really different bodies. That's what makes them good at being an athlete. That's kind of the thing. So anyway, I don't want to get into that, but I just think in general, like I know for me personally, and I think for my students, it just like kind of creates a scary environment in general. I was like, especially leading up to the 2020 election, I was like feeling in particular very uneasy because there was just so much going on and so much discourse and so much craziness. And I was like joking on Twitter, like, haha, who's gonna like hide me in their fake wall? And then everyone was like, LOL. And I was like, no, but really though, like, can someone start thinking about that just in case? Like, so it's, you know, it's kind of silly and it might sound extreme, but like it's a legit fear that, especially as someone who is so like out and does so much of my work through my identity, that like, you know, if there was some law like this in Pennsylvania, I'd have nowhere to hide. And I keep, when it comes up in school, I keep saying to my kids jokingly, like, yeah, I would have been fired about 27 times this year at least. You know, which is great for me, and I feel good about doing that work. But you know, if things did keep changing, if Pennsylvania, which we know is not friendly to Philly and not friendly to being progressive in general, you know, if they decide to make some legislation go through on the state level, like that could really affect me, depending on if Philadelphia is able to finagle our way out of it or not. So I would just say like it's scary. It's like kind of a scary environment. And I think for kids it's even scarier because they don't even, you know, they don't even have the language to necessarily talk about it, or they don't have the people they can turn to that they think will protect them. But at the same time too, it's nice because I think like a lot of kids, and not just trans and queer kids, are kind of like, that's a stupid law. Like, you know, they're, when it comes up, they're like, that doesn't make any sense. Did you hear about this crazy thing? So, you know, on one hand, it definitely is a scary thing, but I also think it facilitates a lot of conversation in the classroom. And, you know, a lot of kids kind of see it in a very common sense way, which makes sense. And that's really heartening for me to see. And it gives space for all kinds of kids to be talking about these issues.
Was anyone else interested in answering this one?
Yeah, I'll hop in. In the Office of Early Childhood, we've been having that discussion about what kinds of books we should include in our curriculum. And there has been a lot of advocacy for queer books. And for something like the Don't Say Gay bill, a lot of people are saying that it's about us introducing sex to students, or especially to K-3, which is what it's all about. But it's not about that. For example, we're putting in books that talk about two mommies, two daddies, two non-binary parents. Like, this is the kind of education that I think that our generations going forward need, because we didn't have that growing up. So I didn't have the education to be able to say, oh, I'm trans, I'm non-binary, I'm queer. What does that look like? Is that wrong? When we could start from kindergarten telling them, yeah, two moms is normal, because it is. Two dads are normal. Non-binary people are normal. So and I agree with Maddie and what they said, that it creates a lot of dialogue that can be both scary for trans youth and scary for educators. So I sympathize with that. I think it's just abhorrent and senseless.
Yeah, thank you all for talking about this. I know it is very recent that all of this is coming about. There's a question too that kind of ties in a little bit as we talk about trans representation. We do see more trans representation in television and media more than ever before, but that visibility was not always there. How has this increased visibility changed the process of coming out as trans or queer? And what are some concepts that you think should be made visible along those lines?
I can start with this one. This is huge for me. So I came out as genderqueer maybe 4 years ago, depending on who it was. Maybe started sharing they them pronouns a little bit before then, and then probably came out to some members of my family. Not counting, but it started the process around then. But part of it was I didn't even know that the language of genderqueer or transmasc people or transmasculine people even existed. I knew that I wasn't a trans man, but I didn't know that there was any other space for me. So I got caught in this thing where I knew for 15 years prior, 20 years prior, that I was what I would say gender non-conforming, but nobody ever talked about that, or butch, but I also wasn't a lesbian. So I felt was told that that wasn't a term that made sense for me to use. And my relationships often had this very coded gender dynamic in it, that if I was with a masculine person, I knew what side I should be on. And it just became this very complicated mess. So I just never felt like I had the right language. And I always felt like I was a failed woman, whatever that meant. And didn't feel like that was something I could identify for myself. And then I finally saw someone who I grew up with, who is very similar to me in a lot of ways, come out as transmasc. And I was like, wait, what? Oh, and like, so I started looking at other people I did a Google search, and then I found this actor that also identified as such. And in this interview, they said, it's almost like finding people that can help you see yourself, and then just saying yes. And it sounds funny if you've never experienced that as a cis or a straight person, because there's lots of people that look like you or fit into those roles. But I couldn't have imagined who I was without having any words, any pictures, any any idea that I could exist and was able to exist, that there are other people like me even. And so it was crucial for me to be able to find other people like me, celebrities, but also friends, teachers. What would my life have been if I had other people in my classrooms that looked like me and were being yelled at? So visibility is crucial. And if you are thinking that you may be trans, or that you think that you're not sure, you're questioning, I would definitely just look at, do some searches and look at people, not to become who they are, but to see if you can find pieces of yourself.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm Puerto Rican, so growing up, there was a lot of telenovelas and all of that. And it was very strict gender roles. And I found my trans identity through YouTube and listening to podcasts of other trans people talking about their experience and how they're feeling and what does non-binary mean and what does that feel like. And I had that click moment of, oh, this is who I am. And now that I'm 25, almost 26, I'm so grateful to see that the younger generation, in something as simple as Euphoria, Hunter Schafer being there, or Laverne Cox being about just about anything that she can do, like everywhere. I love it. I have a little sister who's trans, And she now has that representation to show her, well, this is what a woman is, and you don't have to be born a woman to be a woman. And that it just, that representation, I know from her, means so much to her, and that visibility. But to say to queer people or questioning people that your trans existence is rebellion, it is visibility, it is resistance. Trans joy and just being a trans person on the train is an act of rebellion against the cis normative world. So just keep going, babies, because I feel it.
And just to add a little bit more to that, what Stephanie said was really beautiful, and that resonated with me a lot. But I also just want to acknowledge, like, I can see these changes happening. Like, I teach ninth grade, so I get them when they're on their way into high school and stuff, and they're all coming from all over the place with a lot of different experiences, and for better and for worse. But this year there is quite a few, like a large amount, I would say, of students who are openly identifying as gender nonconforming or non-binary, or students that are identifying as somewhere else on the LGBTQ spectrum. And at one of our GSA meetings, I was like joking around with the kid, and I was like, "This is the gayest ninth grade class I've ever met." Like, it's like the fifth or sixth one. And we talked about it too, and my one student had some really wonderful insight, and she was kind of saying how the pandemic provided space for people to be away from those stressful social environments where you might be pressured to conform, and it gave people time to really be with themselves, and also like learn from being on the internet and from kind of communicating with people in a different way. So I definitely like see those changes happening too. Like, definitely the conversations I was having as a student teacher, and how difficult they were in all of the ways, like, that is not how I feel now. And I'm really grateful to see that.
I just love all these beautiful like seeds of wisdom, like, your identity is rebellion, finding pieces of yourself. Like, this is the good stuff. I love it so much. And I know a few of you touched on this a little bit, but wanting to pay respect to the trans elders and icons who carved a path for you all today. Who are your trans icons and why?
I'll start. Marsha P, Chaz Bono. I mean, sorry. I am nothing without the trans people who came before me and paved the way for me to be able to be in this room where trans people outnumber cis people, and the importance of, sorry, to take a moment.
Was anyone else interested in sharing with us? Oh, Stephanie, yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that the fact that there's so many right now that are coming to mind that I consider trans icons, even if they didn't use the word trans in how they identify. So someone like Elliot Page, oh my gosh, has my heart. Like, I cried the day that he came out, and I was like, look at this, like, I have this person, like, what, like, right? But a lot of times it's smaller. It's that interview that I watched with Asia K. Dillon that changed my mind, and it was just a moment. But I don't see them all the time, but it's still or even someone like David Bowie, that was androgynous, that pushed gender norms. For me, as a non-binary genderqueer person, may not be considered the same as like a binary trans person, and their experiences are different. But anything that allows me to be a masculine person with the body that I am, or it just, there's so many, and I love that.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing. And now our final questions, or again, two-parter questions. It's so nice being in a room full of educators as well. So this is a really great thing to talk about, but how can teachers support trans students? And if young people are watching this recording and they are considering coming out as trans, what would you say to them?
I definitely would approach this from like a high school perspective, since that's where I work and kind of the experience I have. But I would say the same thing I would say about almost any student or young person that we're working with, which is just like treat them like people. I think sometimes we really like forget about the humanity of kids and teenagers and children, and we forget that they're, we're not equals, but we are also, co-conspirators in this space, right? Like they're there with us. So in general, I think just being authentic and affirming of kids in ways that feel natural and healthy is really important. And just like being that person that they can speak to about whatever, because you don't even know how many of your kids or how many kids in the building might be thinking about this or struggling with this. But even just seeing somebody in the hallway, or like seeing a student who feels safe, or seeing those safe space placards, like that's not enough, because we need to back it up with action. But like those visual signals can really, I think, pull somebody through or help them through that confusing moment of like, who am I, what am I doing, what should I be? So yeah, I think just like remembering their humanity is really important. And I think it's also just being willing to speak up, which, you should be willing to point out when there's needlessly gendered language in a school document. Like, why does it say his or hers? Or why does it say this? I would urge all School District of Philadelphia educators to familiarize themselves with Policy 252, because there are a lot of specific enumerated rights that our students have that honestly most of us just straight up don't know about. And for a lot of different reasons, but I kind of was coming into the district when that was being rolled out, and I remember the trainings and that they weren't wonderful. We didn't learn a lot from them, and it was one of those things that got kind of lost in the shuffle on a professional development day. So I would say definitely look up 252 and make sure that you can be that liaison in your building, because every building needs one and not every building necessarily has one. And if you're going to be that person, make sure you're visible, because you don't even know, I work at a very small school, so we all pretty much know each other, but even like the random kid in 12th grade who you've never seen before, right? That might be somebody who sees you and looks to you. Or like the little sibling that comes to report card conferences, even, you know what I mean? Like there's just so many small ways that we can show our support and be like outwardly supported, either like by being who we are and like really living as ourselves, or by like being open and affirming and just humane and kind to our young kids as they're figuring it out.
Did anyone else? Oh, sorry, totally messed that up. Does anyone else want to answer that question?
Yeah, since working with Club Pride, which is a small organization within the DEI, which is the diversity, equity, and inclusion, I've been working with some really cool GSAs, and two examples that really come to mind as allies to queer students are Miss Capici at Kensington Kappa and Mix Kaufman at Bodine, which is the high school I went to. And they have done amazing things with their GSAs, created GSAs in spaces that didn't have them, advocated for gender neutral bathrooms for their trans students, and made sure that they had access to them. They're organizing drag shows, they're organizing walkouts and sit-ins and all that kind of stuff to make sure that their queer students are recognized, visible, and respected within that space. And I know that these two teachers, for an example, and there's hundreds of thousands more, Mix Lubert is an example here in the chat of allies, that the importance of allyship. And we as educators and administrators should be willing to throw ourselves on the line for our students. And that's something that I really, really believe in, is that if we say that we're about it, we have to be about it. We have to show up, and we have to make sure that we're challenging cis-normative ideas. And as something as little as suggesting a book that has two moms in it, for example. We can be allies and advocate for our students. And we have to.
Can I give a shout out actually? Is that okay? I want to shout out my colleague Nikki Dunn, who teaches chemistry at my school, because she has been one of my fiercest allies in my entire process of being an educator. And has been one of those people that I know that I don't have to have the weird pronoun conversation because she already sent an email to that person who made the mistake or whatever it is. And on top of that, of just being a wonderful colleague and friend and human, she's also doing a lot of really amazing work in her classroom, in chemistry and in her contemporary issues in science class, to like push kids to understand gender and sex in a different way, and it, even just have a framework for it, period. And you know, it's really amazing, because I know that it's hard as a math or science teacher sometimes to feel like you can make this stuff work or do these things, or you know, so many of us are stuck to these curriculums that aren't always super flexible, but it is also possible to make it work, and it takes a lot of work too, but people like Nikki are really like helping lead that, and you know, she's someone I feel really lucky to work with.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Those are all of our questions. Does anyone have any last pieces of wisdom or anything you'd like to offer up before we close out the space?
I just want to share that we have 3 trans people on this call. There are 4. I did that out. Multiple people on this call, and all of us have similar experiences, but all of us have different experiences, even if our pronouns are the same, even if, you know, XYZ is the same. We're all people, right? We're all humans. If you ask 25 straight people or 25 non-trans people what their opinion is on the color purple, they're going to have a lot of different opinions, and some may be the same. So just remember that trans people are also that. My experience as a non-binary person is going to be different than a binary trans person, like trans man or trans woman. And so making sure to ask lots of questions to multiple people. Like, you can, if you're not trans, then you can talk to more than one trans person and talk and hear all of their stories, and know that they're all stories of trans people and they can all exist.
I'd say to our trans or questioning or non-binary youth that you're valid, you're real, and nothing and no one can take away your identity from you. And look, we are 4 trans people who are out, proud, and excited to let you in. And we're here. You might not see them in your school or your environment, but we're here and we're ready and willing to help and support you. Absolutely.
I think I'd be remiss as an English teacher if I didn't just encourage everyone to keep reading. And that's for the kids as well as adults and allies and anyone. There's just a really wonderful, huge amount of LGBTQ friendly or representative work happening in like the young adult and middle grades worlds right now. And you know, I've been reading the books as a teacher and as someone who wants to know them, and like I've learned about myself. And so I would say just like keep learning and keep open to the fact that you're going to be learning. I'm still learning, and you know, in 5 more years maybe this conversation would be a lot different, but that's okay too, right? Like we're all kind of shifting and learning and fitting ourselves in different ways. So definitely just have an open mind and push yourself to learn more, either about yourself or about the world.
Those were all beautiful pieces of wisdom. I appreciate it. And it's been just so great to listen to you all. And I know a lot of other people are going to love listening to this too. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this. Also, definitely check out the school district's Club Pride website. There is like tons of great resources on there. Really great supportive community as well. I know you've all shouted out a few folks that are doing some really great work, and there are probably plenty more that we haven't even brought up. So definitely check that out for resources as well. And stay tuned for Joseph's story, which will come up next. Thanks again, everyone. All right, so we are joined today by Joseph McCaffrey. We're going to continue our conversation for Trans Day of Visibility. So Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and anything about your journey that you would like to share?
Like you said, my name is Joseph McCaffrey. I go by he, him pronouns. My journey, it's been a long one. There's been good and bad times. I feel like we've made big strides as far as like the trans and LGBT community, and I'm happy to see it since I've begun my transition, I guess. So.
Thanks so much for sharing. So my first question for you today is, we often hear a lot about the challenges of being trans and the impact of gender dysphoria on trans people. What brings you trans joy or gender euphoria? Is there anything you want people outside the community to know about trans joy or gender euphoria?
Yes, especially in the beginning, being gendered correctly brings a lot of gender euphoria, as well as like just lack of dysphoria over time through transition and being accepted by others brings a lot of gender euphoria and joy, you could say.
Yeah, for sure. And what do you think folks need to know about the trans experience?
I think that they need to know that it's different for everyone. It's not like the same for everyone, whether it's trans women or trans men or non-binary folks. It's different for everyone, and we all have different experiences, though it may seem we are going through similar things. We are, but it's very different for everyone.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you for sharing that. What are some of the challenges you face as trans individual in a cis-normative world?
But it's like cis-normative, so I guess just people still see it as one or the other, and that's just not the case. And sometimes having to explain to others like who I am, especially before when I was early in my transition, it's difficult for someone, and it's not necessarily like something I always feel like I should have to do. And that's just like the shame of being a cis-normative world.
Thanks so much for sharing that too. What would you say to allies who are looking to actively support the trans community?
I would say just you can ask questions. That was my always biggest thing. If you're not sure, ask questions. For the most part, as far as I've seen, we're generally open to answer, and just using the correct pronouns and referring to them correctly is a huge thing.
Yeah, for sure. And then my last final question for you is, what advice would you give someone who is thinking about coming out?
Take your time. It may seem like, oh, I know this and I want to come out now, but take your time. It's not a rush. That was my biggest thing. I just wanted to come out because I knew, and then it was tough because I didn't really know what to say. But once you know and you're comfortable with yourself, whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer some questions. We're really excited to have so many people sharing their stories for Trans Day of Visibility. Are there any other parting thoughts or words of wisdom you'd like to leave before we wrap up today?
Not that I can think of, but thank you so much for inviting me and having me on the panel.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you again. I really appreciate it.